Welcome to this video on J.B. Priestley's An Inspector Calls, and today we're going to have a look at 5 quotations on Mr. Birling. We're going to have a look at the quotations themselves, the techniques that J.B. Priestley uses, analysis of those quotations, and the context that is relevant to those quotations also. So let's get into it. The first quotation we're going to have a look at is this one: for lower costs and higher prices, something Birling says at Sheila and Gerald's engagement party. Despite the fact that they should be celebrating, he's talking about business. So let's have a look at the analysis marked in blue. So, despite the fact that Birling is supposed to be celebrating his daughter's engagement to Gerald, he gets distracted about business. So one of the most important days in her life, and he's talking about business. And that might suggest then how Birling and maybe other capitalists were more concerned with profit than other people. If we have a look at the context, you might say something like, Birling was probably upper middle class, and he's definitely portrayed by Priestley as a capitalist. Priestley wrote An Inspector Calls in 1945, the year in Britain when the Labour Party first got into power with Prime Minister Clement Attlee. So the first audiences would not sympathise with Mr. Birling's way of thinking at all. Priestley sets him up to be disliked, basically. We're supposed to dislike him. So a little bit further, you might ask, what is a socialist? What is a capitalist? Well, a capitalist is a person who uses their wealth to trade and invest in industry for their own personal gain. It's quite a selfish definition there, but that is certainly what Birling is. Whereas a socialist is a person who believes in group ownership of business so that everyone is able to profit. And please don't make the distinction that a socialist is definitely not a communist. It's not sharing all the wealth at all. It's not everyone has an even and equal say. But a socialist does take responsibility for other people in their community, which a capitalist does not. Second quotation that we're going to have a look at then is this one. Some people say that war's inevitable, and to that I say, fiddlesticks. Fantastic quotation by Mr. Birling, and obviously some fantastic dramatic irony here. So, the techniques this time. So this time there are techniques. In red, we've got a pause. And that pause is definitely about Mr. Birling and his self-aggrandizement. Basically, he wants people to listen to him. And then you also have that dramatic irony and exclamatory sentence to go with it too. So let's look at the analysis in blue. So the pause, Birling probably pauses for dramatic effect. He wants to make sure that everybody is listening to him, and it suggests he's very confident in what he is saying and what he is about to say as well. As far as the dramatic irony goes in the exclamatory sentence, we could say that J.B. Priestley uses dramatic irony to make Birling seem ignorant, absolutely ignorant, especially with the exclamation mark. We know that World War I happens 2 years after the play is set. So the play is set in 1912 and World War I starts in 1914. And then obviously there is World War II after that, which shows a lack of insight on Mr. Birling's part and makes him seem unintelligent. In terms of the context then, we could say that Priestley wrote his play in 1945, but he set the play in 1912, very much on purpose, which was just 2 years before World War I happened. And he does it on purpose to make Birling seem foolish, and so that the 1945 audience would dislike him. Our next quotation, one of my favourites, it goes, as if we were all mixed up together like bees in a hive, community and all that nonsense. So, getting into the techniques then, we have a fantastic simile, like bees in a hive, and obviously afterwards, community and all that nonsense, calling community nonsense is derogatory language. Basically, he is demeaning community and what it means. Into the analysis, we could say that, well, the imagery of bees is used in a scornful manner here. Bees, they all work together as a community, and this is definitely an idea that Birling finds abhorrent. He hates it, as he is only focused on his own family and no one else. And the derogatory language then, he calls community nonsense as he is not interested in the welfare of people beyond his family. As a capitalist, there is no profit in social responsibility, so he wants no part of it. Community certainly does not interest him at all. In terms of the context then, the post-World War II audience of the play were a largely socialist audience, and they cared about community. They deeply cared about community. So, in 1945 to 51, Clement Attlee improved social services. That was when Clement Attlee was in power, and obviously when J.B. Priestley wrote *And Inspector Calls*, and he founded the National Health Service to make provision for all Britons regardless of their class. So we can see that Britain in 1945 is definitely a socialist community, and Birling would be hated by the audiences watching the play. Our next quotation then is, "I might find my way into the next honours list. Just a knighthood. Just a knighthood." That's remarkably arrogant of Birling. Anyhow, we might say in terms of the analysis, I wouldn't say there's a technique this time, but in terms of the analysis, that Birling appears to be self-conscious when he's talking about his class and comparing it to Gerald's family, which is maybe a sign of weakness from Birling. So Gerald's parents are Sir George and Lady Croft, and in this case, they're upper class. Birling is probably upper middle class, and they are upper class. They've got titles, which means that they're part of the aristocracy. Birling's not. So he might be very self-conscious about this, and that's why he's having this talk to Gerald. So as well as his priority for economical advancement, or money, he also hopes to improve his class and enter into upper class society. So if he gets this knighthood, he will have that title, which means that he would be able to enter into the aristocracy and become upper class. In terms of the context then, I've said that in Edwardian Britain, the class structure, it was very, very rigid, and it divided people. So upper, middle and working classes, and generally it was very, very difficult to go beyond that class that you were born into. However, industrialization was making this more and more possible. So Birling is definitely involved in industrialization. He runs a business and he makes vast sums of money, which then gives him influence and power in society and allows him to climb through the classes. And in this case, it looks like he might even be able to gain access into the upper class because of the amount of money that he is earning. Finally, the last quotation that we'll have a look at today is, "Rubbish. If you don't come down sharply on some of these people, they'd soon be asking for the earth." So, to start off with, we've got a bit of exaggeration at the end there. They'd soon be asking for the earth. And there's also an element of irony to this as well. Looking at the analysis, Birling exaggerates by saying how reasonable a request for an increase to wages will become a threat to the company. So if he allows them to have this one small wage increase, they're going to be asking for another, and yet another, and another, until it cripples his business. And obviously he doesn't want that. I'm not sure that he believes that, but he certainly isn't prepared to take the chance. And maybe he's trying to teach Eric to be as ruthless as he is as well. However, we might see, as on the right-hand side here, that there is an element of irony in what he is saying, asking for the earth. Ironically, it's Birling that is taking the earth, something that the inspector actually insinuates in the next line. Birling is the one that truly profits from the business by exploiting what he calls cheap labour for vast personal financial gain. So, Priestley means for us who hate him for his selfishness here, he means for us to see this irony, and we're supposed to despise him. You might also talk about the start of this quotation. Rubbish. It's an exclamatory minor sentence, a one-word sentence, and he even uses an exclamation mark to show his scorn. So, Birling finds Eric's suggestion absurd. Basically, Eric suggests that they're not doing anything that's particularly wrong. Well, he hates that idea. So the exclamatory sentence suggests how vehemently Birling feels he is right in this scenario. Finally, a small point about the context, because the context does get a little bit repetitive. So Priestley's agenda is to demonstrate how selfish capitalist businessmen could be, prioritizing personal gain over social wealth, which you might write about Mr. Birling in this quotation. Thank you for listening.